As we head into the winter holiday travel season, one of the busiest times of the year, airports are packed, flights are stacked, delays feel inevitable, and millions of people are moving through the sky at the same time. And it makes you wonder, have you ever stopped and thought about what it actually takes to make all that work? How do pilots know where to go? How do controllers see everything at once? How do thousands of aircraft, commercial, military, and private, share the same airspace? Because what you see at the gate is not just at the surface, right? It's just at the surface. Behind the scenes is a nonstop stream of communications, handoffs, systems, protocol, and people working in real time to keep the world moving. Every day, over 100,000 flights take off around the world. And almost no one thinks about how those aircraft talk to each other, to the ground, to the satellites, or to the military systems sharing the same sky. Today, we're pulling back that curtain. Welcome back to another episode of Brothers in Aerospace and Defense podcast, where we break down the complex world of aerospace and defense, explore the technologies shaping tomorrow, and connect the dots between strategy, innovation, and real-world impact. I'm DeWayne Allen, your P&L host.
And I'm Wesley, your technical host. So whether you're an industry veteran, a rising engineer, a defense leader, or someone just fascinated by how airplanes magically get from point A to point B, we're glad you're here.
Today's episode goes behind the curtain of something we all take for granted: the communication ecosystem that allows aircraft to take off, navigate globally, and land safely.
But first, let's jump into the newsreel from last month.
Let's kick off the newsreel with what is arguably the most important development from the last quarter. Basically, it impacted aviation safety, defense programs, and the broader aerospace ecosystem. First one was, the government funding update. The shutdown was exited, but we still work ahead, right? In November, Congress passed a continuous resolution that allowed the federal government to exit the shutdown period and maintain operations and keep critical agencies like the FAA, TSA, and Department of Defense functioning. This agreement was temporary, not a full year budget, and it pushed key funding decisions into this period, right? And what needs to happen next, right? The FY defense budget must be finalized, and the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, must be fully authorized and appropriated to unlock long-term execution. Because of the November agreement was structured, there's still some risk that another shutdown could possibly happen if Congress doesn't come to a solution. The bottom line is we got some stability, but certainly still is not there. Second thing, right? The FAA air traffic modernization push continues. The FAA continues accelerating next-gen air traffic modernization, prioritizing digital communication, automation tools, and staffing stipulation to improve system resilience and reduce delays, especially during peak travel season, which we're in right now. Right? The bottom line here, modernizing air traffic communications is no longer optional. It is essential. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. And lastly, we got growing pressure from the uncrewed aircraft systems and air advanced mobility. Uncrewed aircraft systems beyond visual line of sight operations and early electric vertical takeoff and landing activity continues to place pressure on the existing airspace management frameworks, right? This is the driving urgency around the uncrewed traffic management, the systems, the rules, the digital infrastructure required to safely integrate all these things together. And the bottom line is the future aerospace is going to be more of about crewed and uncrewed systems, how they can communicate, deconflict, and coordinate in time, right? So, Rob, what you think of what's going on in the news this last month here, man?
I mean, I think two things jump out to me. I think one being the government shutdown. So yeah. I'm glad this is, somewhat past us and, the government is back operational. But also the unmanned systems. I think that beyond line of sight operations and, vertical takeoff landing, eVTOLs, it's great to see that moving forward. And the demand is driving the technology to be in place faster. So I like to see that. I was curious to see kind of where the next steps are with companies bringing the technology forward and, how Congress is going to keep up with the technologies once those companies are at that, first flight, things like that to support all those going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For me, what ties all these together is really the continuity. And these systems really don't tolerate uncertainty very well.
No, they do not. No, they do not. They do not. All right, let's get to segment 1. So let's start with a simple truth. Every second an aircraft is in the sky, someone is paying for communication infrastructure. And the global scale of this industry is massive. Today's aerospace communication ecosystem is about 13 to 15 billion per year on a global market perspective. But depending on how you slice the services, the systems, and the surveillance infrastructure, right? And it's growing right at a 7-10% rate annually, thanks to the demand of automation, digital networks, unmanned systems, and advanced air mobility. And a couple of those things are reflected in what we talked about in Newsreel earlier. So here's how the business breaks down, right? You got these air navigation service providers, ANSPs, groups like the FAA, NAV Canada, Eurocontrol, who collect nearly $10 billion annually in route charges, terminal fees, and communication service charges, right? Then you got the airlines who actually spend for that, those routes, those fees, and those services. They spend about $1.20 to $1.50 in communications per flight hour via for datalink messaging, ACARs, and operational communications, right? And then thirdly, we have this upgrading global aviation communication infrastructure boom that's happening, where we're moving from an analog VHF to integrated digital systems. And this is a part of a modernization that's going to spread across all through, till post even 2030. And that's before we even touch the unmanned systems, the new entrants like eVTOLs, and even the defense integration.
Exactly. And here's what's most important that people don't realize. Behind every takeoff and landing is a chain of paid services, proprietary networks, regulatory hardware, cybersecurity layers, and massive coordination between commercial, military, civil, and private operators. So in business terms, this ecosystem has 3 major value drivers: safety, efficiency and cost avoidance, and then aerospace growth. And then safety is, that's ultimately non-negotiable. The regulators won't approve any system that can't reduce incident risk. From efficiency and cost avoidance, every 1% of improvement in routing efficiency saves airlines over, about $700 million annually in fuel costs. And then aerospace growth, the global air traffic is expected to double by 2040. So imagine that, more aircraft, more communications, more automation, more monitoring, more integration technology. And this is why aerospace primes, comms providers, and emerging autonomy companies are pouring more money into solutions like ADS-B, multi-layeration, and then aviation cellular networks, SATCOM, and real-time data platforms.
Yeah, so it's not just about safety. It's a real business behind it, right? And the revenue cycles are tied to global mobility, defense readiness, and commercial efficiency, right? And, and what as a OEM or aerospace prime, like say a Boeing or Airbus, they really are tracking all 3 of these to ensure that they, maximize revenue across the board.
So let's break down the architecture. Broadly speaking, these are the multiple layers or phases of the control communication during a flight, and each has a distinct role. First phase is pre-flight and clearance delivery. So before any engine starts or pushes back, pilots must obtain clearance, which is an approved flight plan, route, altitude constraints, departures, transponder code or squawk, and then the departure frequency. And this is all usually handled by a clearance delivery function within the tower ATC staffing. Second phase is ground control. So that's when you taxi and ramp. So when ready to taxi, the pilot switches to ground control. So the ground controller issues taxi instructions, which taxis, path to runway, holes, etc. And then the ground radar or surface movement radar helps track that aircraft and vehicles on the ground. DeWayne, I know you're very aware of all the flight travel that you've had recently. What have you seen kind of in that pre-taxi ground control ranks right now?
Well, we're both aerospace geeks, so I'm always, if it's a little delayed and I'm asking questions like, hey, so we ain't take off. He's still, in the pilot, we know we're ready when the pilot comes, and he said, I got my flight plan, so that means he's ready. He's ready to go. And then, we're cleared to move. Or you ask the questions like, okay, why we haven't taxied out or ramp yet? I said, everything seems to be working fine. You see it, right? You hear it, but it's more of, there's some issue somewhere that the tower's got to go figure out for them, right? And they're working through the alternatives and the redundancies to get there. So that's just easily when you're thinking about sitting yourself on an aircraft and you think about, okay, why we haven't pushed back, right? And so you think about those things, right? So what's next, Rob?
Yeah, I think, you brought it right up. So next phase is tower control. So that's when you take off initial climb. So at runway, the pilot contacts the tower controller monitors that runway and then immediate airspace visually, and then ensuring that takeoff is safe and that no conflicts exist with arriving or departing aircraft. And then when cleared, the tower gives that final takeoff clearance and often hands off the flight to departure or departure control frequency. The next phase is that departure, like we just said, and then terminal control. So that's that TRACON. Once airborne, especially in busier or controlled space, the flight enters that terminal control environment managed by the TRACON facility. So here's where the controllers monitor the ascent, vector aircraft, manage the altitude and heading changes, and ensure separation as the aircraft exit the airport's immediate airspace. So once that aircraft is clear of all the terminal airport adjacent airspace, and depending on that altitude and airspace boundaries, the flight gets handed off to an en route center. And so that next phase is en route. So that's center, ARTCC, and sector control. So for the cruising portion of the flight, an en route controller, and that's often part of the air route control traffic center, manage that aircraft. And these centers are in the US are broken into multiple sectors. So each sector manages a controller team, and they monitor the altitude, heading, coordination, and with the adjacent sectors as the flight progresses. And the controllers often provide weather updates, traffic advisories, and altitude or speed adjustments as needed as the aircraft progresses. Have you really noticed a lot in the en route changes in your instance, DeWayne?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is the meat and potatoes that, just the basic fly is thinking about, right? I got off the ground. I'm getting to my cruising altitude speed, and then it's a series of handoffs, right? That happens where the actual plane itself, the plane itself is getting handoff from one ARTCC or the route control traffic throughout its flight path, right? So it's, if you think about it, it's from one, it might be one in outside of, DC, but then it might be one that it gets hands off at DCA, and then it goes to somewhere in West Virginia. Then it goes off to somewhere down to, say it gets to another part of West Virginia, more west, and then it might jump to, depending on your route, and it just jumps from, and it goes through a series of that. And then what's interesting is, this is where the pilot is getting that information, and then he makes a decision of, do I need to go higher? Do I need to go lower? Do I need to go faster? Do I need to go slower? And then this is where you hear about, hey, it's going to be some weather coming up. Here's where you hear about, this is where it's going to be a bumpy right from here for about 20 minutes because somebody, another flight has fed that information to the controller. They understand the weather. They look at all that stuff. And this is the meat and potatoes of the flight, right? This is, if you like me, you like, okay, is it, I'm in the middle of a nap, or is it, time for bourbon? You're just trying to figure it out, right? And get it done, right? So that's what that part is. What and then let's talk about the last two pieces of these, Rob.
Yeah, no, I absolutely concur with you. Usually during that portion of the flight, the cruising, I'm usually knocked out if I can. But yeah, I think for the last two sections, two phases are, the first is the descent, approach, and arrival. And so as the aircraft approaches its destination, the en route center hands it off to the terminal radar facility. So that's the approach control center as covering the arrival zone. And that controller guides the descent, sequencing vectors as necessary, and ensures the proper spacing is among the aircraft. And that arrival controller may assign the approach procedure, altitude, speed, and heading of the flight toward the runway, and to integrate with other arrivals. Last section is really the tower control. So that's the landing and taxiing. Once established on the final approach, the controller hands off to the destination, which is the airport's tower. The tower controls that, assesses the runway status, weather, spacing, and when safe, issues the landing clearance. So after touchdown and runway exit, the tower tells that pilot to contact ground control, or sometimes monitor ground, which manages the safe taxiing to the gate. As we know, gates always change, so that the pilots have to understand, where to taxi the vehicle and aircraft. And then the ground control then guides that aircraft along taxis to the assigned gate ramp. And for the larger airports, which I know you and I have both flown at a lot, these ramp controls may coordinate gate availability and pushback scheduling.
Right. So it all begins and ends with the ground control when you see it in hand. And all these, every one of these interactions as we get to the other segments, they involve a mix of human decision-making, automated systems, radar, data links, ADSB, and regulatory frameworks to help it get along. So that's the communication ecosystem when you think about an aircraft just getting out of the terminal, getting off the ground, and then getting to cruising, and then getting to a point where it's coming back in to land to its destination. So a lot there. We got some more to talk about in the next segment. Before we jump back in, please hit subscribe on your podcast platform, right? It helps us continue to bring this content to you. We really appreciate it. And if you prefer watching this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button there. You can watch the full video version. As always, hit like and things like that, and comment and share for what you see with your friends. We really appreciate delivering this content to you. This is a way for us to know that we're giving you the right things that you want to hear.
So we just reviewed the full ecosystem of the communications for the aircraft, landing, taxiing, taking off, all that communications complex within the human interactions, automation. But now we're going to break it down to what does all that mean? What types of communication it is? And really, explain to you is this is the glossary for all that communication. So it talks to you about, the standard communications rules. From a technical standpoint, this foundation is ICAO, standardized phraseology, and then FAA regulated communication protocols.
Yeah, and then from a business standpoint, standardization is the only reason airlines can scale globally, right? Imagine if every country used a different terminology, and you need a customer pilot training to do one. You need different avionics packages on that plane as you fly from one country to the next, and you got to hire, so costs would explode, right?
Exactly. And then standard phraseology also ensures that clarity. So it's no slang, no filler, mandatory readbacks, or for anything safety critical. And then technically, it really reduces that ambiguity and ensures a reliable human machine interface between pilots and controllers.
Right. And it reduces the training costs. Like, for example, most pilots around the world speak English, right? Because it's like the central point of communication. And so that alone, particularly if you come into any of the aerospaces, English is what they use. So you think about that, reducing costs.
And it really, from a technical standpoint, voice is still the backbone. So more airspace is shifting to data link communications like CPDLC or FANS 1A.
Right. Which again, here's a business angle, right? You got data links. that reduces the radio congestion, it lowers the error rates, and allows airlines to fly more efficient routes, right? And efficiency is the key in this business, particularly from a commercial aerospace perspective. Efficiency is probably the number one or number two metric that you're trying to solve because it helps you deal with how you efficiently costs flow through to your system, right? And one study estimated that, it's $200 per flight and average savings on a long haul route if you got the right altitude, the right wind optimization, and all that's enabled by the digital comms to let you know, right? What other technical notes you got, Rob?
I mean, datalink uses satellite or VHF networks to pass, and that's really from clearances, altitude changes, position reports, route adjustments, and that all dramatically improves the situational awareness for the controllers.
Right. So, the key idea is, you got to have precise comm systems, which drives operational efficiency, which delivers the business value, particularly on that section. So, we talked about already, the actual ecosystem itself, the communication ecosystem. Then we talked about, some of the systems that are in place to put it together and how they communicate across with the phraseology and things like that. We talked about the business. Now we're going to drive into the human and technology integration, where it comes together, where the rubber meets the road, right? So at its core, air traffic control, or ATC, is a layered system of humans supported by technologies. You got controllers who could juggle workloads, situational awareness, handoffs, radar inputs, weather, separation standards, and all that happens in real time. And from a business standpoint, there's challenges. The staffing challenges matter, and we've all probably lived there, particularly this year, right? And when these short staff issues happen, which has been a recurring issue, right? Delays increase, upwards of 20 to 30%, even in some, massive points where we had, huge transfer flights, things like that happen. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars of value that's lost across not only airlines, but thousands of flight hours that's been lost even for military applications, right? And then you got the people piece of it, and the integration is another challenge. You got different radars, SDBs, ADSBs, voice switching, data links, and all that it has this thing called interoperability that must occur. And you need to keep that up to date, keep the upgrading, and that's consistently changing the radios out, looking at the avionics, working through the data links. What's the communication infrastructure backbone of each aircraft? And that can run, upwards of $300K per aircraft, depending on how massive the platform. So, but the ROI in it is massive if you're able to mitigate these things along the way. And then and particularly if new technology comes in, new opportunities come in, we got, reducing the delays, improve the routing, and from a commercial standpoint. And then our defense operators don't have this thing called confliction, and you can easily deconflict what's happening in the aerospace from that point. Rob, what you got that's happening from a technology perspective?
Yeah, so I think, we're going to talk technical for a little bit. So with emerging aircraft, drones, uncrewed systems, eVTOLs are really entering the same constrained airspace. And that integration requires them to really have uncrewed traffic management, detect and avoid communication, digital IDs, priority rules, and then that shared situational awareness. And a lot of these are really creating new revenue streams. So data services, traffic management subscriptions, cybersecurity layers, and every one of these vehicles will require constant digital communication, meaning the entire ecosystem gets more complex and then also more valuable for customers, subcontractors, and others.
Right. So this is the part where if you're in this space, particularly from a business standpoint, if you pick one of those 5 things that that can be your niche market specifically. And if you do those things well and understand the ecosystem, particularly with, unmanned aircraft and things like that, this is going to be critical to help grow your business, but also give you a smoother flight to get things off the ground. So aerospace communication is the nervous system of global mobility, right? When we say this is a multi-billion-dollar niche business, because it's just dealing with the communication, it's because of the companies that build, secure, and operate communications backbone. They are some of the traditional powerhouses in this aerospace market, right? And some of the major players from the air traffic management and ATC providers across the world, firms that make the brains, could be like Thales and Indra, RTX L3 Harris, Leonardo, Saab, Frequentis. And then you got other businesses that, they either do the digital tower and the airport operations modernization, and they buy capacity and build without building new powers because they just making everything digitized, right? And Saab has a great solution for that. And then you got aircraft to ground comm networks, and this is the plumbing behind everything between the cockpit and the ground. And so those are opportunities where some of the players, where the major players are playing at some of the niches in the market space there it is.
Yeah, and the reason governments and industry keep investing is very simple. You can't scale air traffic on voice and legacy infrastructure alone, especially with this weather volatility that we noticed drastically over the past few years, staffing constraints, and then also more aircraft in the system.
Exactly. So the spending happens for three reasons. Obviously, safety and compliance is first. Capacity and efficiency, which helps with the delays, improve the throughput. That's where you get your growth and get your business value up. And then resiliency and security, which you got to have that continuity. And this is why this niche keeps growing and sits right at the intersection of public infrastructure, national security, and global commerce. All right. So let's wrap up, right? So here's a few things we're going to just wrap it up about. Some bullets we're going to leave you with, right? So aerospace communication is a multi-billion-dollar global business powering everything from commercial airlines to military operation. Every flight relies on a dozen of systems and dozens of people working together in a precise choreography. That's a great word, right? And then modernizing this infrastructure reduces the delays, fuel costs, carbon emissions, and control of workload. Rob, you want to add a couple?
Yep, I had a few. So one with emergent aircraft. So that's those uncrewed, electric, autonomous, will require the most advanced communication ecosystem ever created. And the future of aerospace is also going to be digital, integrated, and highly automated.
So thanks you for joining us on this deep dive of the invisible world that keeps global aviation moving.
If today's episode opens your eyes to scale, complexity, and business behind aviation communication, here's your mission for the week. Look up next time you see an aircraft or airplane in the sky and think about the thousands of invisible messages that help get it there. And then share this episode with a person who loves aerospace just as much as you do.
Right. And before we sign off, we just want to pause and say thank you to all our subscribers. We crossed the 1,000 subscriber mark and on Brothers in Aerospace and Defense. And that tells us that there's a real appetite for depth, context, and conversation that would go beyond the headlines, right?
And this community not only spans engineers, operators, executives, students, and future leaders, and we don't take that lightly. So we will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for being part of the journey. And until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep building the future.